Maybe this is to Dr. Lewis. Let me start there. So the information that China gathers from this most recent episode and the information they can continue to gather, what's its value to China?
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. It's worth bearing in mind that the Chinese government is paranoid and composed entirely of control freaks. So some of the information they steal, it's not clear why they take it. The intellectual property that lets them design new products, like in the telecom sector, that makes sense. Traditional political military espionage, what our war plans are, what our capabilities are, that makes sense. But some of the personal data they take really doesn't make sense. Now, they do it at home because they're afraid of their own population, but they do it to us too. The downside to this is we don't want to wake up one day and find out that the Chinese have figured out how to use the personal data they've been collecting on Americans. Heavens knows they're trying to figure out what the benefit could be.
Is there benefit just of distraction, expense? The United States is taking its eye off other balls while we address this issue?
I don't think so. I think it's a crucial part, and I think all my fellows would agree with me. It's a crucial part of China's plan to overcome the United States.
That's useful for Americans to hear, too, what you just said. In our unwillingness to respond in deterrence, looking the other way, in a sense, is it expensive, lack of will? It seems to me that we've learned in other Cold Wars that you respond to your adversary's actions, and you respond in a way that diminishes those actions in the future. I appreciated your suggestion that there be negotiations or conversations that precede that, but if we're going to have any chance of success in combating these continual attacks, it's got to be a dramatic and real consequence to China, right?
No, that's absolutely correct. The Chinese, part of, and I think my colleagues would agree, part of deterrence is you have to be credible. You have to make credible threats. And since probably about 2010, other countries have concluded that our threats aren't credible.
And are there other countries where the threat is responded to, where the actions are responded to, and there's a consequence of less? Who else besides the United States is in the crosshairs of China?
All NATO members, Japan, Korea, Singapore, the Philippines.
Do others do it better than we do?
They are in the crosshairs of the Chinese. None of them do it in part because they're looking to us for a signal. They're looking for us to lead.
Mr. Olvenin, something you want to say, add to that?
No, what I would say is that historically, when I've spoken with previous administrations about response options, the caution has always been the situation is asymmetrical. The domain is asymmetrical. The United States is asymmetrically vulnerable because we're a more digital wired society. Therefore, we have more to lose. Therefore, we shouldn't respond. My response to that has always been, but over time, the Chinese economy, the Chinese population, key elements of the Chinese digital infrastructure have in fact become much more modernized. And I would argue that we have achieved a relative level of symmetry where that asymmetry argument really doesn't hold any water for me anymore. To be honest, I've, over the years, burned my own hole in the ozone layer driving up to Central Maryland trying to talk to people about ranges of response options. Even when we had very clear understanding of who had done it and why, and even with a discussion about the whole range of U.S. national power, not simply tit for tat in cyber. And as I pointed out during the first Trump administration, the lowering of the authorization threshold under NSPM 13 actually resulted in greater activity, response activity. And one thing I would highlight, for instance, as a success was the attack against the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, which we knew had been responsible for some level of election interference. And there is a school of thought that said there was less election interference originating from that type of organization in the subsequent election because we had imposed cost on the Internet Research Agency.
Do we have the capability of responding?
We do have the capability of responding across a whole variety of measures, including cyber. And so it isn't a capabilities discussion. It is absolutely a political will and national command authority decision-making discussion.
And finally, would we know if we'd responded? I've often wondered if we have responded to Chinese attacks, cyber attacks on the United States, and China would never report that we had responded to those attacks.
Well, to be honest, sir, I don't think that that's the metric of success. In many ways, if we want the Chinese to de-escalate, something that they see and understand the consequences of, but doesn't create a public situation where they feel reputational shame, where they then have to respond again, probably is the best outcome.
You took that differently than I'd intended, but my point was that I'd feel better if we were responding as compared to waiting, but we just didn't know that we'd responded because the Chinese never made an issue of it. I just wanted to make sure that there's not a fact out there that I don't know or that we don't know about something we're doing.
I would turn the logic upside down and say deductively, again, in an open hearing, deductively, you could conclude from the increasing severity of the Chinese intrusions and attacks that we have not, in fact, previously imposed costs on them that has changed their cost-benefit calculus.
Thank you for reminding a member of the United States Senate about logic.
No, sir.